been able to make it to today's webinar will be able to watch it at any time. You've got three co-hosts today. You've got myself, General Payne, or Jennifer, General Payne Sims. We've got Nick Bullseye Brown and John Obst. Now, John, I apologize in advance. I probably should have asked all these questions before I put this together at the last minute, but I'm not known for thinking ahead. What we'll do is we'll move on. So what we're going to cover is just a little bit about us. Where do you get the software from? How do you install it? What should people do first? What if you want to be fancy? Common faults and errors. And obviously, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for any sort of questions, discussion, those sorts of things. In this Zoom, and the reason I'm doing it this way through Zoom is that Zoom has a webinar function, which is super fancy. So please, if you have any questions, any queries, anything really, just post it either in the chat or into the Q&A section, and then one of us will reply. Anyone can reply to those questions. Just need to jump in. So a little bit about us. I'm a level 1 certified referee. I would probably be an NSO if I remembered to do the requirements. And I come from Kingston City Rollers. So we're in Melbourne, Australia. So we're all the way down south in Australia. So we're in Melbourne. We're actually fairly close to our friends in the Victorian Roller Derby League, or VRDL. My other co-host today, Bullseye, if you want to jump in real quick.
Yes, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are. I'm a level 1 certified NSO. Just waiting on the feedback from panel to see if I got my level 2. I was tournament head NSO at the Great Southern Slam, which is a big roller derby tournament down here in Australia last year, co-T-head NSO with Connie. I've been around Derby for coming on 8 years now, and I'm also based out of Kingston City Rollers with Jen.
And John, do you want to jump in if you've got a working mic?
Yeah, I should have a working mic. You can hear me, yes?
Yes, we've got you.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, hi, my name is John Obst. I go by John Lane in the Derby world. I am the games data manager for the WFTDA. So that includes running CRG for all of the sponsored tournaments. And I've traveled to a bunch of non-WFTDA tournaments as well. So I've got a lot of experience with CRG, and before that, Ringster. Sorry.
Oh, that's a penalty right there, John. We'll move on. Now, this is where the little presentation stops, and I move to my screen share. So everything we do in CRG that myself, Bullseye, John, and for those who have met and have seen the ever elusive Speedy do, or otherwise known as Frank Weinberg, everything is done in GitHub. So GitHub is basically it's a free piece of software that lives on the internet that allows people to develop software. So people will often come in here, and I have shared this in the meeting chat. This is pretty much where you can download them from. The other thing that's really good with what we do is every time there's a new release or there's a fix that has some pretty big issues, we'll post it online and we'll pin it in the Derby Scoreboard group on Facebook. So please keep in touch on there. If you know you've got a problem and you want someone to have a look at it, please, you can come into this little issue section here and you'll see everything is sort of tagged. So you'll find that, for example, we know you can't download a file, or when the score sheet doesn't show up in a team, it doesn't update the details properly. So if you come in here and you post the details and you say to us, this is the problem, this is how I caused it, this is how you can recreate it, we can then sit down, pull it apart, and help fix it.
And obviously, the more detail you give, the better. Screenshots are always good.
Definitely. Keep in mind, some little fixes, like it might be a spelling error or a screen tip or something like that, something that doesn't have, I guess, we talk in roller derby parlance as did the game have impact or did it break derby? If it doesn't break derby, then it may be held to a bigger release. Like it may be held for a little while until there's enough change to issue a release. But if you remember, many of you will remember I think it was 2018 or 2019, the last game before COVID struck, where the scoreboard froze with 30 seconds left to go in the VRDL championship game. That was noticed and was fixed very, very rapidly and pushed out very, very rapidly. And we thank Frank for finding that bug and quashing it as rapidly as it did, because that had all the wrong eyes and it was noticed globally. The other thing in here is there's a little wiki. Now, this wiki is available also online, but we've now put it into the actual release, so you can access it. So like if I bring up and I change tab here, I have a CRG scoreboard running both locally and in our little cloud server that I have running. You can now access the details through here, through the local snapshot. So you can access that without the internet. So if you're in the middle of a game, you've got no internet, you can still go in here. This lives locally on your computer and is basically shared through the scoreboard system itself. So you can get down to your most common things. But we do try and keep that updated. But we do also update this because we've also started to add things like lineup tracking, penalty controls, because CRG is becoming more and more powerful. John would probably be best to comment as well, like for using it for championship level games and the like, having that rich data makes their life so much easier. So definitely come and check in here. We'll start with the how-to of how to install it. So realistically, this is a big thing, and I'm going to edit this later on today. Please don't dump the scoreboard over the top of another version. So like if you have for example, here I have a folder with the scoreboard in it. Don't then go and grab, say, 2023.4 and then dump it over the top. Always do it fresh. You can always copy your logos. They're always in the HTML folder. Under images, you can always grab this folder at any time and move it anywhere, but please don't dump it across the top. We have seen, if you've moved from the old version 5 to the now 2023 labeled versions, so they're labeled based on a season, what you'll find is that the data management is very different and it can cause issues. I've seen crashes, I've seen all kinds of really odd, exotic behavior, which didn't happen again when it was done fresh.
And also just on your logos and stuff like that, one of the new features of the 2023 versions is depending on where you place the folder. So you can see Jen's got hers there in a temp folder on the C drive. If you were to drop your new CRG version within that same temp folder, the new version would actually go through and it would find that previous install and grab all of your logos automatically from that previous install as well, and also some of your historical data files.
So there is a lot of automation that's built into it. What's important is in here under releases is all the current releases. So you can go back down through every history of that's ever been released. Like if you wanted to go all the way back, it goes back as far as, if I go all the way back to the very start, if you want to go right back to the day it came out, you can pull version 3 where it has very little, it's super light. This was updated way back when by a former member of the team, FTP. He hasn't been around because he found life again. But you can see that as we release things, as we change things, as we fix things, there's a little bug fixes list. So you can always see, okay, that was a problem that I had last time I played the game. Now it's been fixed. The one thing I will say is when you're downloading it, please always just use the zip file. The source code and the source tar zip file, or tarball as it's called, is really only for advanced users who know how to build from source. Most users will simply just want the zip file, nice and easy. So once you grab the zip file, I've got it here, for example. Normally it would download into this folder, so I'll do it now. And I will point it here. So it downloads it, and then there's your zip file there. Obviously, you just extract it because Windows comes with a free extraction tool now. It's all built in, and you end up with this simple folder. At this point, there's nothing more you need to do other than drop your, if it's a fresh time you're installing it, you can either drop your banners and your logos and things in here if you wish. Some people do that because they find it easier, because then they can fix the names. They can, you know, remove any funky characters that make it hard to read or you don't know which one's which. And then from there, in a Windows machine, you literally Scoreboard Windows. What is newer and you can't see in this version is that going forward, there will be a Mac command file. So for those who are Mac users, the first time you start it, you have to do Command Shift, right click, and then go, so like this, and then go open on a Mac. I know this is Windows, but it's the same theory. The reason you have to do that is because Mac OS security doesn't recognize an unsigned piece of software, so it won't let you launch it. But if you do the right click and go run or open, it'll then say, are you really sure you want to do this? And then after that, you'll be able to click it. It'll be exactly the same. For those who, like me, are a Linux user, so you can see I've got this is Rollerscape living in the cloud. You can see I've literally just downloaded it, unpacked it, and then you launch it. Obviously, the problem with Linux is that it binds your screen, so you need a third-party tool if you want to be able to do other things on this machine at the same time. But this is what it looks like for Linux. I don't want to go too into the weeds on this because I know that many of you know how to do this bit, so we'll keep it nice and light.
Did you want to talk about the prerequisites for the JDK or JRE? I mean,
do you want to add that in? Do you want to add that in, John?
Sure. Yeah. So the CRG scoreboard is written using Java, not JavaScript. So in order for it to run, you do need to install the Java Runtime Environment, or JRE. That's a free download you can get from Oracle. There's also OpenJRE, but I don't know that we support that. So I would recommend using the Oracle one. If you just go out to Google and type in Java JDK, you can download the latest one there.
It's also in the wiki too.
Excellent.
We added the links there.
Yeah, and if you don't have Java installed and you're on Windows and you try to run it, it will just give you some obscure errors about missing files. So it isn't the clearest when it's not installed, but it is covered here in the wiki. Yeah.
The good news is we've actually fixed that. So now if you try and start the scoreboard without Java on Windows, it'll say you need to install Java, and it will actually take you to the download spot. So you won't have to, there's a lot less thinking required when it comes to Java. But it is available in the wiki as well. So it's really quite simple. You just click on the link. It'll take you here, select your software. Personally, for most, I guess, regular users who are not geeks like me and John and Bullseye, just use the installer because it'll just make your life so much easier. You know, next, installed, happy days, and away you go. So what you've got here is there's two versions. I've got one like living locally, and then I've got one that's living in the cloud. So I did share that with everybody in the chat. And so now you've got a running scoreboard. At this point, I don't see any questions. Does anyone have anything that didn't make sense in that little how-to section?
I think the only other thing I would cover, and it's in the wiki as well, is how to get to the website after you launch the scoreboard server.
Yep.
So if you go back to your command line there, where you have it open, it puts the URLs you can use to access it there. So there's a bunch of URLs because it binds to every IP on your system, and most systems have multiple IP addresses. In this instance, There's IPv6 and IPv4. But you can also do the very first one, localhost :8000. So if you just select that, you can copy that and paste that into your browser, and that will take you right to the scoreboard page in your browser.
And the other cheats way is start. The start file, if you're using it on the one machine, will do exactly the same thing as well. Yeah, but yeah, you'll find that like John just mentioned, in my case on my computer, because I've got a highly complex network, you can see all the different addresses. In most cases, if you're just a single computer connected to a projector, that'll do the job just nicely. Versus if you're in a venue with multiple network devices, like if you've ever been with myself in Bullseye, we tend to run a full setup because we're also running live streaming. We are running electronic penalty tracking. We're doing all those sorts of fun things. We'll know all these URLs and have them programmed to help people out.
Right, and one thing to remember, if you're going to be accessing default Windows install over port 8000, you do need to open up the firewall or disable the firewall. If it's a secured network with just the CRG system, you can disable the firewall. But if you're on public Wi-Fi or something, you'll want to make sure just to poke a hole for port 8000.
Yes, absolutely.
There's lots of websites you can go out and Google how to add an exception to Windows Firewall to do that. But if you don't do that, Windows Firewall will block remote computers from talking to the CRG server. So it's an important step.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So many of you would be familiar with the main panel. So I'll open the main panel here. Everyone's probably familiar with this. Forgive the logo I was testing with my fire brigade logo because someone reported a fault with logos not displaying correctly. So this is the panel that we're all very, very familiar with. You're all very, very used to. There's a couple of changes that have been made that I'd probably call critical. The first thing is the clock stop and start buttons have been hidden by default. And the reason for that is if you're starting and stopping your jams and your lineups and your timeouts correctly, you'll never need to use those. The way I teach people is when you're starting a game and you're the first time you're sitting down, you're looking at this, you're like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. There's so many buttons. What do I do? I teach that you start with learning how to start and stop the time so that way, the jam starts. You can now say it's running, the clocks are running. So I teach that you start jam and you stop jam. Once you get familiar with that and you're comfortable with that, then you can start adding in, you could add the points because, we need to know who wins because we're not competitive at all in this sport. Adding your points is fairly straightforward. Your +1, your -1. Some people like to do this way. I personally don't. I like speed buttons. So you've got +4 down the bottom, +3, +2, +1. The other thing you'll now notice, see how they've gone orange, is because based on the rule set of a standard 30-second lineup period, we've now exceeded that. So it's now saying, should we be in a timeout or should we have started the jam? So again, I focus on teaching the start and the stop because that's the most critical. Outside of that, everything else is nice to have. Obviously, as John can attest to, as you start climbing up in the ranks of being an official and you go from your local scrimmage on a Thursday night to big tournaments to WFTDA sanctions through to championship level games, the expectations climb. But realistically, if you've spent the time to sort of start at the bottom and work your way up the system, you get pretty familiar and it's pretty easy once you understand that it's not as intimidating as it looks. So again, you stop your jam. What I teach to everybody is if they call a timeout, but you're not sure if it's a team timeout or an official timeout or whatever, click official. It at least stops the clock. The key is that period clock has stopped correctly. It doesn't matter about what's displayed on the screen because this can always be fixed. The good thing about CRG is it works in what I like to call states. So right now, right now the state is in official timeout. So if you go, oh, hang on, this went to the white team, it's actually their timeout. You can click team timeout on white side, and you'll see it's changed because you haven't moved out of timeout. You've just fixed who was the timeout. But the key again is the clock is correct. The period clock and the jams are correct. There's not, lost time that a team could argue had an impact to their game. And then from there, you can start adding on things like selecting lead, clicking call off. Obviously, that has an impact to paperwork. And down the bottom, we'll go through that in a minute. But realistically, starting with the basics and then adding on more and more, it makes people a lot more comfortable. And I found when I have been teaching at tournaments, so for example, straight after this tournament, I'm literally hightailing it down to my team's grand final game on the bench, because I'm, as much as I'd love to skate today, I'm not allowed to yet. That tournament, I've had derby officials and skaters that have jumped into a role and said, yeah, I'll help out, which is great. We love people that help out. But then they look at the scoreboard and they're like, oh my God, I am so scared I'm going to break it. No, you won't. Just start with the basics and work your way up. The more you add on, the more that's displayed. If the clock is right and the scores are right, the teams aren't going to care. They're really not. The more you add, and I'm sure John can attest to this, when you're at tournaments where they start using bench displays and there's iPads and there's things like that, adding those things on is fairly painless. It's actually pretty easy. Do any of my co-hosts want to add anything to my little mention there?
Yeah, I was just going to say you pretty much covered everything I've sort of said, but my only other call out would be obviously Scoreboard is one of the things that I always try and make sure that as a rostering NSO, I try and make sure that I get people that have actually had experience on Scoreboard when it comes to game time. I know that's not always practical. So if you are someone that's new to Scoreboard and you are stepping into a game scenario where you haven't done Scoreboard before, just make sure that your head NSO and all that's aware of it. So that way they can try and aim to have someone else that might have a little bit of knowledge around it close by to help out. Otherwise, I strongly encourage just downloading it, having a play with it in your own time, talking to your local league that you're affiliated with and seeing if you can just bring a laptop along and sit down during one of their scrimmages and just play around with the scoreboard while they're running a scrimmage. They don't necessarily have to have a scoreboard running for display, but you can be just sitting there and copying along with the jam timer and ghost adding points and things like that to just get a feel of how things are, whilst there's not a stressful scenario of, oh, we're in a game, I need to make sure this is absolutely 100% correct and I'm getting everything 100% of the time. We want to try and avoid that stress where we can, but unfortunately sometimes it's not possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the thing I would add is what I've had a lot of people do is to go to YouTube and look up any of the derby games that are out there and pull up your laptop and just click through the scores, the clocks and everything in sync with the game that's on YouTube. That way that gets you experience as well. It's not as great as doing it in person at a scrimmage for sure, but if you just want to practice, that's a great way to do it in the privacy of your own home.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I just saying it, what John just mentioned, I think it's pronounced Brain of Terror from Ireland, has a whole bunch of YouTube videos on some of the scoreboard basics as well. So if you can navigate his very thick Irish accent, there are some really, really great videos that he's put together that includes, like, he might have done I haven't looked at all of them, but many of them will walk you through the absolute basics. We'll move through the scoreboard here, and I'll cover off a couple of things. So obviously we know from top to bottom, you've got your basic start, your stops. So like if we end a timeout, it'll go into lineup and it'll start, pretending that the 30 seconds has been called.
So that's an interesting point. So There is no official rule on whether or not to do that, but we found through international play that North American teams don't start the lineup after a timeout ends. The rest of the world does. So figure out what leagues are playing the game that you're working, and whether or not they're expecting you to start a lineup after a timeout or not. If you're in North America, you probably just let the timeout go and then hit start jam whenever the the whistle blows to start the jam. But if you're in Europe or Australia, then you do need to start the lineup clock after 1 minute of timeout has expired.
It's funny you mention that, because it's not something we do over here either. I've added it because
okay.
it helps new jam timers get used to calling the 30 seconds. So I tend to do it based on experience that sits around me. But yeah, I actually thought it came from the US, but okay, it's come from Europe.
Very much a European thing, which is it's interesting how derbies evolve separately in two different continents, but it is what it is. Just make sure that everyone knows how you do it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always a good chance to segue to making sure that you have a chat with your other officials and your head NSO and your head referee, so that you know what their expectations of you are, so that way everything runs smoothly. Moving down through here, you've obviously got your team timeouts, your official review and if it was retained, your star pass if they're passing it. You can select no pivot. No pivot has no impact on your screen other than turning green, but it does set your lineup to say that there was no pivot for that game. So there is some value. Sorry?
I was just going to say, I'll just add there that if the game is running the electronic lineup tracking screen, make sure you have a chat with the people that are running the EPLT first, because if you do star pass or the no pivot, that will impact what they will see and do. I have had instances before where the scoreboard operator has done has flagged the star pass, and then the lineup tracker's gone to flag the star pass, so the star pass has been undone, and there's been all sorts of conundrums with that. So that's just one other thing before your game start, is just have that expectation of who's going to be entering the star pass, who's going to be entering the fact that there's no pivot into the software if they are running an EPLT lineup.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's been pretty standardized, where the scoreboard operator would be the person denoting star passes and the EPLTs would be the person denoting the no pivot, by way of just not fielding a pivot when they're doing lineups. But again, it's always good to have that separation of duties defined before you start the game.
Yeah, 100%. It's all about we're all one big team of zebras, and I forget what whether we were called pelicans or
Flamingos.
Flamingos. Thank you. I couldn't remember the animal. You can see how well I go with trivia. That having those conversations and getting to know the team or the crew you're working with, so that way everybody, you know everything. And not know everything, I mean that you know who's doing what your expectations are. Like as a scoreboard operator, are you selecting the jammer and the pivot like I am here now? Or is the person that, and when I stop this thing from popping up on me every 10 seconds, when we look at it from this way, like, does that mean that this person here is doing this? Or, who's doing what? So that way, straight away. Going through this, we've obviously got lost lead. So you know that there's generally two sections where where lost lead is marked. I'm not going to go into the rules today. Lead is fairly straightforward. Call is fairly straightforward. Injury, will mark it on both sides because the jam was called for injury. And NI is your no initial, which I often call the sad giraffe, because that's how I used to call no initial as a jammer referee before I broke my ankle. Then going through the rest of it, there's only 2 skaters on this team, which obviously doesn't meet the rule set, but it was just for the demonstration purposes. You can set your jammer, your pivots. So then if there is a star pass, like if I start this jam is now running. Oh, there was a star pass. It'll eventually swap over. It's not letting me do it because you said there's no pivot, but if I take out the no pivot, the star pass will happen. You'll notice with the clocks, there is your +1 and your -1. That's just if you need to add a second to fix something because maybe you were a split second slower than you should have been. Realistically, I teach people what you see on the scoreboard is the correct score and the correct time as per the rules. There are some jam timers who love keeping the stopwatches accurate to the scoreboard and change the scoreboard to match. Just obviously keep in mind if it's only a few seconds, I probably wouldn't worry about moving it. But again, that's a rule set thing and I'm not going to delve into it. And then going across the bottom, you've got your period clock, your jam clock, your lineup clock, timeouts, and your intermissions. Now, obviously, they'll only go green when they're operating. And then when the jam ends, the jam goes gray and the lineup goes green. The number is just how many times you've gone into lineup. And that's really all there is to it. It's fairly simple, fairly straightforward. If you want to turn on certain things, you can come up into the top menu bar here. So auto end jams just basically means when it reaches 2 minutes, the jam ends and it goes into lineup on its own. Enable replace on undo. Sorry, go on.
I'm going to say, yeah, on auto end jams, you almost never would turn that off. I'm hard pressed to think of any circumstance where you would ever disable that.
Yeah, unless you're having a silly scrimmage or something like that, or
yeah,
we had a scrimmage at a boot camp that had 3 teams, so there were 15 skaters on track, and back then that was when lap point still existed, so that was a nightmare. Replace on undo is there. You've got show start stop. So these bring your start and stop buttons back. Really, you don't need them. If you're following the basics of start and stop, you don't need them. Use score adjustments is if you need to add an adjustment because there is an adjustment that needs to be made, then you can add those points to use them. Show tab bar is just this little tab bar at the top, and end of period controls are fairly straightforward. The good thing is if you have a period that's just about to end, and like let's say that there's 15 seconds of lineup left in the last period, in the second period, you can go timeout before period end, and what it will do is it will put the clock back to 1. So it'll say how many timeout with how many seconds left on the period clock. So you've got to sort of work out, okay, at what point did the bench coach and the referees notice the timeout, and then it'll apply it for you. So you don't have to do any of the thinking or fiddling with the clocks or anything like that. It's really simple.
Two things that I'll just really quickly add on to the top of what Jen's just gone through there. For those that haven't done scoreboard much, the new adjustments is a new feature. The add adjustments is a new feature. It's primarily based around if you're not running the electronic or not wanting to have the electronic score sheet 100% accurate straight away, and there is a score discrepancy noticed, it just allows you to really quickly add those 1 or 2 points or take those 1 or 2 points off that are missed without having to go through the rigmarole of trying to find the specific pass that the score change needs to happen in for the specific jam and going through and changing it. It just allows you to add those 1 or 2 points or take them off and keep going with the game, and then coming back at halftime or at the end of the game and going through and fixing it all up then when you've got the physical paperwork.
Yeah, and that's a great feature that was really asked for recently. So historically, CRG didn't track electronic paperwork. It was really just everything you saw on the screen was what would be projected, and it was really easy to change things. And then as we've added more features to it and the paperwork generation and things like that, it's become a little more complex. And some of the older NSOs who are more familiar with the old way were, a little longing for some easy ways to do changes if they weren't running a full crew or if they didn't care about paperwork. So these adjustment things, if you're not running a sanctioned game, or you've got a really new scoreboard operator and someone has to come running over and add a point or take away a point because they don't know what they're doing and they're panicking about it, it's a really simple way to just make the score work for the game you're in, and then you can fix things later. The whole idea is to not break Derby, as Jen had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, pretty much. And then what's changed, like John just mentioned, is Now, what the scoreboard operator can see is a running sheet that should look exactly like the two score keepers sheets would be. So if you look down the bottom here, you can see that each of the jams is recorded, the star pass is recorded exactly how it should be. The really good thing too is, and for those who have ever been taught the dot system, when this jam starts, for example, if I say that my team on the left got lead, you'll see the dot is now moved to trip 2. So if you've ever been taught the dot system, the scoreboard follows the theory of the dot system. So you know, okay, they've done their first pass, they're now on their second trip, and this is a scoring trip. If you ever need to come back and fix any of these for any reason, you can literally click the little pencil and you can add details, you can add jams, you can fix pretty much everything now. You can then go, oh, it was actually skater number 2. They did get lead. They didn't lose lead and they called it. So you can update everything rather painlessly now. As where previously it was a real nightmare to fix things, and that was something that was acknowledged. So you can literally click the pencil. Oh, hang on, jam 2 didn't actually happen. It was a jam that was started in error. So you can literally go remove jam 2, bang, it's now fixed. It's so much more easy to fix things than it ever was. The other good thing too now is if there's a timeout and you realize, oh, wait, hang on a minute, that was actually a team timeout to this team, or it was an official review, you can literally click the little pencil, select it from the list here, and go, oh, it was actually an official review. It'll then say, did they keep that review? Yes, they did. Job's done. So it's a lot simpler and a lot easier to fix things than ever before. If you know that really they got in this section here, they actually got 4 points on trip number 3, you can add the 4 points, but you'll notice now it's gone orange and it hasn't updated the score. And the reason for that is because it's following the rules. And what's happened in this case is that this edit was done too late. And so it's not accepting and displaying that edit because it's outside of the way the rules are written. And by that means that by the end of jam 2, the score from jam 1 has to be corrected. Outside of those corrections, it doesn't apply them. You can obviously then go, oh, wait, really, that should be showing. So you can use your adjustment like I just did there. But realistically, that adjustment was just too late. So it's saying, what's the offset? And you can go late points addition. And it'll let the details are now here. So you can see here that it's in the score adjustment sheet, and those details are now visible. So you have to tell it why you're doing it, and then it will let it go through. So that follows the WFTDA rule set. You can edit any of these things at any time. Obviously, don't fiddle with them mid-jam if you can avoid it. If you can fix it in the 30 seconds, great. If you can't, well, you know what? It happens. Let's fix it. But as you can see, it's a lot. When you talk through it, it's not nearly as scary as it seems. Again, I teach people to start with get your start and your stops correct, get your score correct, and then you can add on selecting lead. Then you can add on picking the jammers, especially if you don't have and aren't using the full feature set. You can quite easily you can build on, okay, I'm now comfortable with starting and stopping my jams. I'm now comfortable selecting lead and adding points. I'm now comfortable. So the more you do, the better it is, the easier it becomes. What's important, and the only other thing that I haven't covered, is key editing. So what you can do in here is you can turn on what's called key editing. So in this case, some people, myself, Bullseye, and I'm sure John's probably the same in the US, As you get up in tournaments, you'll find that a lot of the time people will either bring their own keyboard, or there'll be a keyboard on that desk that has all of the relevant buttons. And you'll probably seen this discussion in the Scoreboard group as well. So you can program your start and your stop, your points, your lead, because I find the hand is quicker than the eye. And me reaching for my mouse and clicking timeout like I have here, I might not be as quick if I set W as my end timeout or my end button. So I hit W and it goes straight out of timeout. So you can set any of the keys on your keyboard. However, like it says here, move the mouse over a button and press a normal key, but not escape, enter, or F1. Now, there is one other key we say don't use, and that's space. So some people often used to program Start Jam as a space. The problem with the problem with space is twofold. As you can see, the Start Jam is set as space here, but you notice how, see this button here, the edit key control has the blue ring around it. This is what my browser knows was the last thing I clicked. So if I hit space to start a jam, it goes into that edit key control mode. And you can end up like, if for example, add points was the last thing you clicked, see how it's recognizing that I'm still hitting on, even though it hasn't added the points in this case, it will still recognize that that was the last thing I highlighted. So that's why we don't recommend using space, because browser recognizes it as the last thing you touched. So you could end up with some really wacky and funky ways.
I think don't recommend isn't strong enough. I would say instead, absolutely do not use space as a hotkey for anything ever. You will break something.
Yeah, there has been a fix put in that is supposed to avoid this happening, but it hasn't been extensively tested, and there are still probably edge case scenarios where it still may happen. So yeah, our recommendation is, yeah, just don't use the space key.
Yeah. So this segues into a question that's just come through. So from Therms, she asks, is that the way you would recommend fixing the jam number down below? Like that the scoreboard accidentally started and stopped a jam, and now the number is off compared to all other paperwork. So this reflects back to the editing of the jams. Bullseye, you were going to take this one?
Yeah, so there's two different ways to do it. You can either click on the jam number, where the jam clock is. So Jen, if you can just click on the 4 there for us.
I'll do one better. I'll give you remote control.
If it'll let me do it. There we go. You can click on the number 4 and it will pop up and show you the jams. These will show you which jams can and can't be deleted in a really easy fashion. Any jam that has points you can't delete. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is, yes, to select your pencil and then select remove jam. At this point, it's really operator preference. There are two, you can use either way. It is completely operator preference though.
Awesome, thank you. We'll cover off the rest of it because we're starting to eat away time a little bit. So we'll jump away from this screen now and we'll go into Teams. So Teams, you can always just edit the details live. So you can select their uniform color, their logo. You can always play with colors. So like how the dots show up, how the overlay colors show up. These sorts of ones the overlay colors and things like that. A lot of people tend not to fiddle with them. They just leave them as is. But then when I run tournaments where I've got a live stream going, I'll often have it all customized and making it look pretty. You can literally type straight away, add their details. You can select captain, alt captain, bench staff, not skating or skater. The good thing is now with not skating, what will happen is whilst it will not show up on the actual scoreboard and in someone you can select, on the actual IGRF paperwork, if you export the paperwork, what will happen is it will remove that skater. So you won't see them in the sheet here. So like you can see, I've set number 1 as not skating. So now they don't show up on the penalty tracking sheets. You can always edit, remove them. Big tournaments, I recommend just going not skating for that game, because otherwise if you remove them, then there's the pain of re-adding them. It just takes additional effort that really you don't need. League and team, fairly straightforward. The uniform color, this comes off the IGRF too. So if you, and we'll cover this when we get closer to it, if you're importing off an IGRF, if you filled out the details fully with all of the details, CRG will read all of those details. So if you've done an IGRF, don't go through the pain and agony of typing it manually. Let CRG look after you. Alternate names is if you want something on the scoreboard or on the public display. Like, so if you'd rather they show up as just like that, then you can literally say, that's how I want them to show up. If they're on the overlay, you might, for example, you might shrink Victorian Roller Derby League to just VRDL. It just makes it easier. Your skater numbers and your names. The good news is if I go like this and I go, it will automatically follow the correct numbering that we do for Derby. So it's got that intelligence built in. That's fairly straightforward. I'm not going to waste too much time here. The rules tab.
Before you move on,
sure.
One thing that is really cool that got added a while ago is you can copy and paste from Excel or from Google Sheets directly into here. So if you have a Excel document set up with number, name, pronouns, and you've got a bunch of rows filled out, you can select them all, Control C or Command C, and then Control V or Command V into this screen, and it will just populate all of those fields with everything you need. So that's in the event where you're not reading in an IGRF, but you have the rosters stored in Excel somewhere.
Yeah, which most of us do, because it's just easy to keep track of when you add and remove people than trying to work a Word document or a messenger chat or something like that.
And especially if you're printing lineup paperwork and penalty box paperwork and things like that, you'll most likely have filled in IGRFs, and that way you've got all your skater names and numbers populated on those sheets.
Yep. And don't forget that Excel and Google Sheets both hate leading zeros, even though CRG has no problems with it. So anybody with a leading 0 in their number, just double check to make sure it is here correctly, as it may not copy out of Excel.
Yes, definitely. The other thing to take, and I don't do, and I guess this is probably a bit outside the scope, I tend not to mark on paperwork if someone is hard of hearing or has special requirements, only because if you import this or copy and paste and have here that I'm, for example, hard of hearing, what happens is that appears on the overlay, that appears up on the primary scoreboard, and sort of calls out their special needs. The way I see it as a referee, when I've tournament head refed and the like, we treat everyone as having a hearing difficulty, because then we are not making special accommodations for just one person. We're treating everyone exactly the same. That may be a little bit, I guess, blunt, but it just means that we don't end up calling out someone's, in this case, hard of hearing disability on a public screen. It grinds my gears personally.
Yeah, and there's other things that get added too, like there might be a C for captain or A for alt or something, and you probably want to strip that out as well.
Yeah, and in here, you can do this here anyway. So you can set captain, you can set alt captain, and the system will recognize that and update all the details. Togna, I apologize if I butchered your name. Yes. So Togna asks, for copy and paste from Excel sheets, if you don't have a pronouns column, can you just take the 3 columns instead of 2? Yes. it will recognize that. Okay. The rules tab, if you want to have, like if you have say a scrimmage rule set you want to use, you want to set period times, you want to set jam times, these all just look at the rules from roller derby and you can play with them. I'm not going to go too deep into them because 99% of the time they literally just run your standard, you know, two 30-minute periods, 30-second lineup, 2-minute jam, 1-minute timeout, those sorts of things. The interesting thing is you can also come down here and edit the files. So the WFTDA 2018 penalty sheet, you can create your own penalty sheet. And you can set how many times until someone fouls out. The IGRF.
The only thing,
oh, sorry.
To go back to rules, the only thing people typically change here is halftime length.
Yeah.
So that's under intermission durations. Jen's got it here set to 15 minutes for halftime. Some leagues run 10, some run 20. But if you wanted it to be correct, this is where you would change that. So you can change this to match the length of halftime that you have scheduled for your game.
And if you're running, say, a shorter game, so you're running 2 20-minute halves, the second one from the top, which is the period duration, is where you would then change that.
The other thing too is in these rule sets, and I'll use my other one here in this managed data system. You can see here all the rule sets that have been created in the system. And for those who are curious, there is a JRDA rule set which has the new triggered injury timeout and everything like that. Now, moving on, we have the IGRF. Now, in this case, I haven't set up the blank stats book yet because I'm a little bit slack. But basically, what you can do is whenever you import from an IGRF, this will fill out with all the details like the venue, the city, tournament, host league, start times, etc. The good news is for those who have to fill out the paperwork, you can always come here if you're doing full penalty and scoreboard tracking, and you can get the details really painlessly for your paperwork. You can also add in your skating officials, non-skating officials. It even recognizes the correct cert levels, who your head referee is, and so on. So it's really good. At the moment, it's saying that I'm not going to let you export this document because it's blocked by unapplied score adjustment. So you need to go back and correct that. The other thing here is it says blank stats book never set up. So in this case, using my other window, I will go.
I'll just quickly drop some data into roller skate, Jen, so you can show that as a live
Oh, okay, cool.
Too.
So if I go here. No, this one's not there either. You didn't do that one. That's okay. Basically, all we do, you come and grab the stats book. So it'll say, where do you want to download it? Just put it in the root folder here like this. So wherever you started the game from, just drop it into that root folder. I then keep a copy and paste of the name. Then what you can do is come back in here, and in the settings tab, it says, where is the blank stats book file? You'll see it's now gone to a green tick, so it's now happy. And now the stats book has never been updated, but it's blocking the update because there's the unapplied update. So once you fix those, you'll then have the ability to actually export to the IGRF, and it'll have all your team names and your skater names and everything. Your sheets tab, if you want to.
With the IGRF, it does support A4 or letter if you're in the land of non-metric.
Good point. That's right. We live in metric in A4, but yes, it does have. You can download letter as well.
Yeah.
Just again, whatever file you put, just make sure the blank stats book is in that file. You can call it whatever you like, but the scoreboard needs to know where that lives. Your sheets file is literally just what your score sheet looks like. what your penalty sheet looks like, what your lineups look like. It's just what you would pretty much see if you were looking at someone's paperwork. And then settings is fairly straightforward. So you can set the intermission labels. Sync clocks is left on. Show clock after timeout is lineup. The time between the end of lineup and auto start being applied, so it allows for 2 extra seconds. You can go auto end team timeouts. So what this means is once it reaches the 1 minute, it automatically drops itself into lineup. You don't have to do anything. It will do it for you. 99% of the people I've seen don't turn this on. It's all very, I guess, what you prefer. CRG tracks lineups is turned on. So in this case, that means that someone is running around with an iPad. You can turn that off if you don't want to. It really makes no difference to the operation of the scoreboard. Team name for display is usually either the league name, the team name, or their full name. You can change that at any time. And the name format for games, just leave it. The reason I say just leave it is this meets the WFTDA requirements for submission. So it's labeled the correct way to meet the WFTDA requirements. Your main settings display, if you want to play with things like you want certain images to display or you want certain things to show up. So like there's your current preview of what the scoreboard looks like if you want to swap the teams to the other side, if you want to hide logos, if you want sort of nice, pretty rounded boxes with a bit of space and things like that, then you can play with it. Most people,
the side padding is pretty useful. There's a lot of projectors out there that cut the edges of your screen off. So if you add side padding, that will bring it back onto your screen.
Yeah. Most people just leave it as is, but if you know that you've got an odd projector that's just, it looks like it's falling off the edge, you can come in and turn the padding on, and then it'll just add the additional space to make things look pretty. Moving on, your penalty. So from your displays, we all know that's your normal, what you'd project. I'm not going to go into that too heavily because we all know what that one looks like. We've all yelled at teammates when we're looking at time and, call. Why is that not going back now? Sorry.
Just one note on that. For the people who are not super computer focused, the easiest way to get to this screen in another tab or another window is just right click on the index page. So if you right click on main scoreboard, you can do open a new window.
Yeah, you can also do shift, I think it is, or control. I can't remember which one it is. And
then you can drag the new window over to your other screen, which is the projector. Then on Windows, you can hit F11 to make it full screen. And then go back to your main browser. So yeah, if you have two screens, which you will if you have a projector, most likely, you'll just open this in a window, drag it over, make it full screen, and then you'll only use the operator page.
Yes. The penalty whiteboard display, myself and Bullseye use this quite heavily. You need a display, and on the benches, it lets them see if you're using the full whiteboard set up with the full everything, they can see their penalties being added. It's fairly straightforward. It's same thing again. If you want this in a new little window, right click, there's your new little window, and then play with it as you will. Jam timer mobile control. We have played with this a little bit at our team scrimmages when we're kind of shorter people. You can start and stop your jams. You can go into timeouts and things like that. There is a little bit of option there. You can fix the clock if you need to. I don't know of many people that do use this one, but it's there if you've got like an iPhone or something and you're kind of short on people. And, as we know at scrimmage, sometimes when someone's sick and someone's away and someone's got work, that we go from having, 50 people willing to NSO to 2. So you've got some options there.
One of the things that I've personally found good about that mobile control is if your venue is quite easily set up to run a scoreboard and you're running a scrimmage and you want teams to be able to see what time they've got on the clocks, but you're not necessarily too stressed about the score, it allows you to not need to worry about having a scoreboard operator and 2 scorekeepers, and your jam timer can just run with a mobile phone in their hand, and they can just control the jam clock from their hand, and you're still able to display the scoreboard with the time so everyone can see what's going on. You just don't get any scores.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we've got the penalty and lineup options. Most people will tend to use both together because we combine both roles together, as it seems pointless having 2 people to do the same thing. John may have a different opinion when it comes to higher level games. But in most cases, what you can do is you set the team. Now, if you're using an iPad or a tablet device that has pinch zoom, most people leave it disabled because then it stops you accidentally, I guess, dragging everything out and making it so big that you can't read it. So again, here we're going into our next jam. Jammer, pivot, blocker, blocker, blocker. Oh, hang on a minute. Jen got a penalty. She was a legal assist. And you can literally add those penalties straight away by just clicking on them. And you'll see that the code talks about what they are. For those who are going, what on earth is OOP, out of play? It's fairly straightforward. It's got all the current rules in the system. You'll now note that illegal re-entry is now classified as a cut, because you are gaining advantage from cutting the track. You've got your illegal positions, your interference, your multiplayer, etc. What's important here is with this screen, when you add the penalty, it'll look at the current jam and period. So it'll work out where you are in that point. What you can then do is if you're using the full lineup, you can go, oh, yep, good. She's sitting in the box. So it won't let you do it now because the jam's not running. But what you can then do is click jam. When the jam is running, you click box and it'll change. So if I go and start a jam. So that jam is now running. Eventually what you'll be able to do is click that it was served, and you'll see that it'll change color. So it'll go red for when they're sitting, and then once you've completed their box trip, it'll then go, it'll clear. So like, for example, here, this person got a forearms call. They're now sitting. So you can see how the little line has changed. And then they've served it and they're clear. So that way you've got a really easy way of tracking whether someone has actually served a penalty. And if you remember by looking at these again, and I'll zoom in really quickly, you see how here it's got an exclamation mark saying not served. They're sitting. It's now marked as sitting. And then when you're clear, it goes empty. What that means is if I go to the relevant tab in here, I go operator panel, Zoom sheets. Let's see if I lineups. See here how it shows that in this case both penalties were served. So I'll zoom in a bit to make it a bit easier to read. See how the box is showing us ++, because that's following the correct parlance for the rule set. So this is fairly straightforward. When the jam ends, so I'll end the jam. You'll notice how the star pass now changes to go to next jam. Basically, it's saying any changes you make now will be recorded against the previous jam. So this is a chance for you to add any penalties that need to be added. As soon as you click go to next jam, you'll notice that the jammer, the pivot, and the blockers all go back to the bench. You now know that you're starting your next jam. And then down the bottom.
One of the good things about that one as well is if you have someone that is still serving in the box at the end of the jam and you haven't done that second click to clear them out of the box, it won't automatically remove them from the lineup. So if you've got say, yeah, thanks, Jen. If you've got, say, we'll give the pivoter or give someone a penalty and then stop the jam.
So they're now serving.
Yep. And then if we then stop the jam and go to next jam, you'll see that Jen stays flagged as in the lineup because Jen's in the box. So should, in all theory, be on track in the next jam unless they've been expelled.
And you'll notice that for jam 7, my lineup marker is an S, because as soon as that jam starts, so we'll say the jam has now started, I have now served my penalty. You'll see how it changes to a $sign to say that I have served my box trip. It now has penalty overturned, or there was no penalty. So if you need to remove it, you can fix it. You can now even flag them as sit out for the next 3, so it doesn't allow you to line them up anymore. There's a lot of fun features in here now for those who go to that high level. Backing out here, and again, and I'll fix my zoom because it's so huge. Your game data, your games, teams, and rule sets. If you've got teams, you can add them. If you want to import games, you can import them here. So you can
want to
actually
jump into roller skate, Jen. I've got a previous game in there now.
Cool. Teams, rule sets. There you go. So in here, you can see that there was a prepared game with all the details. You can see here that there are teams. So as you start adding more and more teams, if you've got the same computer that comes week in, week out to the same tournament, or for example, it's the same computer that John uses at WFTDA Champs, those teams will always be remembered, and you can always manually edit your rule sets. The other thing too is operators will allow you to add multiple operators. It's fairly straightforward.
One of the other good things about this screen is this is where you can do all of your file upload. So you can see there's a choose file option with then import JSON stats book and blank stats book. So if you've got an IGRF, you can choose an IGRF to upload, and you can then select import stats book. And that will then import all of your game data from that IGRF. Or if you can't remember exactly what you need to do in the settings to upload a blank stats book, you can just go into here and choose your blank stats book file and click on upload blank stats book, and that will do all the importy things that it needs to do for you to have that blank stats book to be able to then export your game data at the end of the game with.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got that we have covered. Files just allows you to upload logos, sponsor banners, which does work now. If you've got videos, custom screens that you might want to use for overlays, things like that, or game data. It's just file management designed to make it point and clicky rather than you trying to figure out where the files are on the machine. Your scoreboard settings just takes you back to that last tab in the operator panel. And then devices just allows you to see what devices are running on the network, whether you want them to be, read and write and stuff like that. That's pretty advanced, so I wouldn't expect anyone to know how that works. But you can always find out the name of your device by literally down the bottom. The little QR code has been recently added as a really great idea to make things easy. So like if you're working with John at a major tournament and he hands you an iPad that you have no idea how to get onto the scoreboard to be able to actually start doing your job, you can literally open the camera app on that device, scan the QR code, and it'll take you to the scoreboard. It's designed to make things really easy. If you know you're using a different IP, you can literally click the little button of the network you want, and it will change the QR code accordingly. The only thing we haven't covered is the overlay and the overlay admin, because it's not really something that we talk about from a scoreboard operator perspective, but this is what it looks like, and this is what you're used to seeing on your if you're watching Roller Derby live on TV, on your YouTube or whatever, this is where that's coming from. This is traditionally used by your, your streaming crew. You can see your penalties, your logos. You can play with it and put details in. There's a whole lot of fun things you can do in here. But realistically, most scoreboard operators will have nothing to do with this. But I just thought I'd show it to you for the sake of showing it to you. Other than that, look, really, that's all there is when it comes to CRG. I think the big thing, I think any of us today, myself, Bullseye, or John would say, is just get more familiar with your starts and your stops. So you everything's starting and stopping correctly. That's really all there is to it. Now that I've applied that outstanding adjustment, you can now see I can update the stats book. And if I want to download it, it will then let me download it. And I'll drag this onto my other screen. And now you can see the details have been pulled through. And that's all we wrote.
I think the only thing we didn't really cover that I would mention is back on the controls page.
Sure.
You saw Jen had logged in there with an account, and there's a logout at the top right now. All that does is map your key settings. So if there's multiple scoreboard operators working at a tournament and they all have different keys defined, those are stored under each login. So if I wanted to use like T for timeout, S for start jam, and whatever keys I use, but somebody else has a totally separate scheme that they like to use, then they can log in as themselves and it will remember those key mappings for that login.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see I've added A, B. I've just chosen random letters for the sake of the discussion. So you can see how it's now got if you look at the little A next to start jam, but if I log out of John and I go over to me, they have now disappeared. So each person can have their own customization to their level of comfort.
And the one thing that I'll add on to that is that the operator is case sensitive. So if I was to log in with Bullseye as an uppercase B and set all of my settings, and then 2 games later come in and log in as Bullseye with a lowercase b, all of those settings that I'd set up would be no longer there and I'd have to redo them, or remember that I'd set it up with a capital B and then log myself back in.
Yep. Cool. That's it. We can always go into the weeds. We can do an into the weeds one around setting up e-lineup and e-tracking, and we can head towards some of that sort of stuff, given John's experience with being the data nerd of WFTDA. Just remember your friends who would love to travel too. Other than that, I don't have anything else that I want to add. There's been a couple of really good questions that have come through. So just for reference, Goofy asked about Java. Realistically, I've never seen a Java memory leak cause a problem. Usually it's just a bad piece of code.
In the newer versions.
Yeah, correct.
Ever since 5.01, I want to say off the top of my head, the lines that were causing the memory leak have been fixed. So there haven't, actually no, sorry, there was one in the early 2023s, but that's all been fixed now. So we don't have any issues with the memory leaks at the moment. But if you do see things where it's using excessive memory, take note of everything that you can and just shoot it through to the Facebook group, and we'll raise it with Speedy and whoever else, and they'll be able to dive through and work out where it's happening and get it fixed for us.
Yeah, back in the old days, we used to restart the CRG server after every game, just to ensure things were smooth. But I've now gone to just restarting it at the beginning of each day. So I think things are a ton better than they used to be if you have memories of how it used to operate.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember watching the WFTDA championship game. VRDL were up, I think it was like 4 or 5 points, and it froze with 30 seconds to go. And I'm like, oh God, it couldn't have happened at a worse time. And I think a few of us raised it straight away with Speedy, and Speedy spotted the problem pretty much instantly, and we had it fixed before anyone had a chance to complain. So we do watch and we do ask, you know, if you've got any questions, please post them in the Facebook group. That's what it's there for. We've all been through the trauma of getting stuck or something going wrong. We've all been through the trauma of something failing. Just please post in the group. If you can give us as much information as you can about the failure, what you did, you know, I click start jam and then I'm like, I unstopped the jam and then I added a timeout and I unstarted the timeout. The more you can tell us about how you did something, the higher chance we have of finding the problem. And yeah, that's really all there is to it. I hope this helped. I thank Bullseye for coming online. He's away with work. And John, I hope it's not 3 o'clock in the morning for you, because I know that the time zones make the world interesting unless you're a flat earth person. Yeah, that's all we wrote.
Yeah, you know, like Jen said, reach out to us with questions in the Facebook group so everybody can see them. We're happy to answer those things. And I would say that everyone in that group is super responsive and super friendly. So they always say there are no dumb questions, and I tend to agree with that, with, you know, our approach to this. So we'll answer whatever question you ask, and we'll do it with a smile.
Yeah, absolutely. And Julia, yes, I am recording this, so as soon as Zoom gives me the link and the passcode, I will paste it in the group and I will pin it in the group as well. Other than that, that's all she wrote. I am not doing a rolling whistle over the internet because I can see that going badly. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to stop the recording at this point.